Again, thank you all for attending. This is the Making the Cash Flow webinar in partnership with Lichfield and Tamworth Chambers of Commerce. It's part of an ongoing series across Greater Birmingham Chambers, aimed to inform and advise members, and also showcase a wide range of our member businesses who have some expertise to share with us today. Today is around cash flow. We welcome Baldwins accountants, who are 1813 members of Lichfield, Tamworth, Burton and Chase Chambers, and a well-known name across the accountancy world, I suppose, especially in the Midlands. We have Paul Clifford, who's regional manager, and also Mark Huddleston, who is on the call, but we can only have 4 people on the screen. So you'll see Paul and Mark will swap as they go through their Q&A following the presentation by Paul. We also have Philip King, the interim Small Business Commissioner from the Office of Small Business. He's been in post since January. We've worked with his predecessor previously with a great sort of source of support and advice and action in some cases for small businesses throughout the UK in what is a very important time for that side of things. We also have James Blackman, President of the Lichfield and Tamworth Chamber, a real keen advocate of the of swift and prompt payments, and a big supporter of the hashtag Pay in 30 Days campaign that has been running during the course of his presidency at a local level, but also taken up by a wide range of businesses across Greater Birmingham, and also touching upon various themes covered by the Small Business Commission. So thank you all again. As I say, there's a chat box in the right hand side of your screens. We will be having a full Q&A session later on after the 3 presentations. I would really encourage you to ask questions of all 3 or 4 panel members, I should say. Certainly, I know, having seen some previous webinars with Phil, some really good advice and some stage takeaways for small businesses. If you've got any questions during the course of those presentations, please put them in the box, and we will come back to them following the presentation, and we'll go from there. There'll be 1 or 2 polls, 1 or 2 questions sort of throughout the course of the presentation, which again we encourage you to engage with. It gives us a good idea of some of the views in the room, and we look forward to hearing from you all now. So introductions over. We'll get started with the first presentation. We welcome Paul from Baldwins Accountants. As I said, he's been with Baldwins for over 13 years, MD of the Tamworth office in our sort of patch, so to speak, and East Midlands regional partner across the area. A long career working with SMEs, local businesses, typical clients up to 10 million turnover, and specialising in business turnaround and improvement. So, Paul, welcome to the webinar. Great to see you. We'll also see Mark from Baldwins later on today as well, but I will pass over to you now, and look forward to hearing how businesses can survive, revive, and thrive through some of your advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for that. Hi, I'm Paul Clifford. As Chris has already given me quite a good intro, I must admit. So what I'm going to have a talk about today is the experiences of some of our clients, first of all, and then some of the advice we're giving to clients at the moment, based around what you'll see on the screen is what we're calling survive, revive and thrive, the 3 stages we see of the COVID effect and what it's doing to business. If we move on to the next slide, Jess. So I'm going to talk about deferring tax, maximising cash and securing funding, which I'm sure is important to everybody at all times, but even more so in the current climate. I think at the moment, my experiences with the clients that we're seeing, and as Chris said, we've got quite a large client base, especially in the Midlands, of SME clients, is that we're very much going through the survive stage at the moment, and probably coming to an end of that, hopefully. Certainly from the clients we're dealing with, the effect of the government incentives that came out quite quickly in terms of what they were, and then understanding them and applying them has been more difficult, I think, for everyone. But certainly the last 2 weeks has seemed to really enhance cash positions for clients. The furlough payments starting to come through, and from clients we're speaking to, that they're coming through very quickly. We even had some people start to receive them last week. That's really helped cash, and it's really helped to mothball businesses at the moment. I think the initial first few weeks was very much a vicious circle of people stop paying cash, holding on to cash. As we know, cash is king. So that effect seems to be slowing down now, and cash does seem to be start to moving again. And I think that's where we see moving into the revive phase is going to be very important. We see the revive phase as more the CBILS loans being more applicable in that world, and really building businesses back to coming out of where they are. So I'm just going to ask Jess to put up the first poll if you can. So we're asking people here what their experiences are of the CBILS loan, and what I'll come on to a little bit later after a few of the tips is our experience of the CBILS, and it'll be interesting just to see where people are with that. So we're looking at what kind of people have applied and have been approved, and other people that are still waiting for decisions, etc. on that. If we move on to the next slide, please, Jess. Should we leave the poll up a little bit? Sorry, Jess. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the CBILS at this point. So it's been quite well publicised. It's got a lot of media attention, as you would expect. I think reality and the media is quite far apart on this. There's been a massive expectation gap up to this point. It was certainly portrayed very early on. Okay, so the poll results. Which is interesting. We've had no one that's been approved on this call, so that is interesting straight away. We haven't applied yet, but we'll be doing so again. So again, there'll be some interesting stuff upcoming at the end of this presentation, which will help on that. Our experience with the expectation gap has certainly been that government have announced this and pushed it out to the banks, but the banks are still unsure how to administer these. There's very conflicting stories we get from each bank, to be honest. Within each, there's very conflicting stories and bank managers. So if you have applied or you have talked to your bank, don't feel that you're on your own in this being a more difficult process than it's been portrayed in the media. And I'll certainly come on to a few tips around that. Moving on to tax. Tax has been one of the few areas where the government has really been quite effective in my opinion. The VAT deferment straight away of the first quarter payments was a massive help straight away to a lot of businesses in terms of holding cash. And I think there are some other tips. I'm not going to go through them all on here, and I'm sure we can share these slides afterwards to everyone that's attended. But there are some few tips which I'll pick on, which I think are quite good. Bad debt relief is a key one. So after 6 months, if you haven't been paid for an invoice, you can reclaim the VAT on that invoice if you've paid it over. Now, a lot of people are moving into bad debt. Is becoming a bigger problem. So I think that's going to be that could be quite a nice way to get some VAT back in the next quarter when we all have to start paying again. Consider changing to monthly VAT returns depending on your type of business and other VAT schemes. So again, speak to your advisors about what options there are with the VAT. I think that is very important. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Jess? These are some of the more interesting ones. R&D tax relief claims. There's a lot of businesses at the moment. This is quite a popular tax relief at the moment with R&D. It's certainly something we've been doing a lot of with our clients. The rules are quite robust really on R&D, and a lot more work can qualify for R&D than you probably would imagine. So again, speaking to your advisors, or if your advisor's not comfortable, speak to ourselves. We can certainly look at any business to see if there's any kind of tax reliefs. Accelerating tax repayments is a very good one as well. A lot of businesses will be struggling over the next few months and will no doubt be making losses. So simple things such as moving year ends and extending periods to utilise those losses in an earlier period can really have a good cash flow effect, especially when we come into this revive phase. Again, can we just move on, Jess, to the next slide? So I'm going to move on to the CBILS, but before I move on to that, I'm going to talk about this revive stage that I keep mentioning. And the revive stage for us is what happens when we've got to start business again. We've very much gone into a mothball effect at the moment. We're furloughing staff, cutting rates, payments, rent payments, etc., managing cash flow. But what happens when we get that fateful day when we all come out of lockdown again and we've got to gear the business up? and we're talking a lot to our clients about what that looks like. Now, none of us know the date. I personally hate the question I keep getting asked, when is things going to be normal again? Well, no scientist in the country knows that, let alone me. But I think what we have to do is, and what we're talking about, is starting plans on a day zero. So what happens on that day when we go back in? What kind of stock management do we need? What kind of staffing will we need? What will be the payment terms? Really reflecting on business, reflect on your own businesses, which a lot of the SME clients are not that well informed in terms of their own businesses. Very much entrepreneurs, very much people that have built the business up from their knowledge and been successful. But now it's a case of looking back and getting some advice on what that business looks like. I'm actually going to just put the next poll up if we can, Jess, before I talk about this slide. Because one of the main things that we're pushing our clients for is a rolling cash flow forecast. Now, this isn't something that's complex. We're looking at a 13-week cash flow forecast to see where the cash is going to be, and actually doing this forecast from day zero and backwards. So to put some context around that, if we're told that we can reopen business at the end of May and we will be back to normality, how soon do you need to start paying suppliers to be ready to open on the 31st of May? How soon do we need to get staff back in? What operations do we need to pay for? And it's what will that do to our cash? And I feel, and what we've looked at in our modelling for a lot of businesses, is that's where the C-bills loans will become more applicable. That's where we'll need the cash to push the business forward and to be ready to restart again. So moving on to the C-bills loan, which Jess will bring up now. So that's an interesting mix. Just from the poll results, I think that's very interesting, actually, and good to see. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting as many to say yes, so that's really good to see, and I think it's a very important process at the moment. Moving on to the C-bills loans, there's quite a detailed slide here, and again, we'll share them about who's eligible. There's been a lot of talk about personal guarantees. That's been on, that's been off. A lot of talk about the level of loans and the guarantees, how it works. We've started to find in the last 2 weeks that we've started to get some of these loans to come through. Working a lot with Mark Huddleston, who's on the Q&A later, so we'll have any questions for him around these. He'll be certainly prepared to answer. I think he's dealt with every bank under the sun in the last 2 weeks, trying to understand this. There's also, obviously, yesterday morning, we obviously started to get some details through about these emergency loans. I haven't put anything about those. We're still trying to decide how they're going to work. Again, there's meant to be a simple questionnaire. Is the media release? When we spoke to the banks yesterday, they had no idea what that was. So again, I think we're going to have to be a week before we understand that properly. But what we're finding, if you can move on to the next slide, Jess, is that with the C-bills loans, the banks are very much the banks. So they're looking at still, is lending money applicable? Would it be applicable in the normal world? Would it be applicable when we flex it for the COVID? And a lot of the rejections we've seen are clients that went directly to the bank first without coming to get some advice. And they're provided the information they believe the bank wants, but it's not enough detail for the banks. Now, the concern for us, and why we're pushing our clients to get advice on this and to aid their cash flow with these C-bills, is that we see the demand is going to go high on these when people start to think about reopening. And as soon as the demand goes high, the bank will struggle to cope, and it will slow down the speed at which these are released. And we're encouraging clients to get in early and get in with the right information. Again, I'll say we'll share this slide, which has got a lot of information on the kind of things we've seen from the banks or are expecting. And if you can prepare that information and put it to the banks, that's a real way to help the cash flow move quicker. We move on to the last slide then, Jess. So just to wrap up really what I'm saying in this small slot, there's a lot more we could talk about, but we're really encouraging clients to self-reflect at this moment about their business and understanding the cash flow of their business, which for a lot of people is something unusual for them. So there's a lot of support around to do that. I think the government's been excellent in some of these schemes, but it's now about, in our eyes, it's now about thinking about the revive stage and what happens when we come out and what cash are we going to need to manage through that situation and planning for that cash. As I say, any questions at the end, please feel free to ask, and I'll have Mark Huddleston join me for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I think some interesting themes raised there, certainly. And as you say, you could probably run 10 webinars on all those ways a business can work. But certainly those slides will be really important and useful for those businesses that are on the call today. I've got a few questions that I've sort of picked up on that, so we'll share with those alongside the other delegates following the other two presentations. So Paul, thank you very much. We'll hear from you a little bit later. So that was Baldwins from Tamworth and across the Midlands. And again, I think something that has been shown across this crisis, I suppose you could call it, is willingness of businesses like Baldwins, and granted many other accountants, but also many other businesses, is that sharing of knowledge and that sharing of advice. And I think that's really important. And that brings us really quite well onto our next speaker. It's a pleasure to welcome Philip King, interim Small Business Commissioner. Again, a really important role that the Small Business Commission played before all this happened, but I think now as ever, and with a lot of areas, has really come into focus. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of Phil's feedback and ideas and advice. So, quick introduction. Phil was in post from the end of January, so a bit of a baptism of fire, Phil, I would imagine, with what's been happening. But certainly his 40 odd years, 40 plus years, shall I say, Phil, in credit management, chief of the Chartered Institute of Credit Management for 14 years, and obviously a huge passion around all things small business. So no better man than to be in that position, I'm sure, to advise. So after that intro, no pressure, Phil, I'll pass over to you. Pleasure to welcome you. Thanks so much for giving your time today, and we look forward to hearing from you in the next 5-10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good morning, everybody. There is no doubt that currently small businesses are facing huge challenges. They're facing real worry, and they're facing massive uncertainty. We heard fairly recently a poll from IPSE, the self-employed organisation, that said that 45% of self-employed people were worried about meeting basic living expenses. We've seen stats saying that as many as 1 in 5 small businesses will collapse and fail into insolvency as a result of COVID-19. And we're seeing the best and worst of behaviours from large businesses as this crisis unfolds. If I may, let me just share a little bit about the Small Business Commissioner and what the office does. Our objectives, we were set up under the Enterprise Act in 2016 and were first actually formally set up in 2017. But the objectives under legislation are for us to resolve payment disputes between big and small businesses and to tackle unfavourable payment practices. I think our services fall into 3 distinct categories. The first of those is advice, information and signposting. So our website, and the details are on the slide you can see at the moment. Our website has all sorts of advice and tips and help on it, and has the contact position where you can get in touch with the office. And we give advice and information on anything to do with cash flow, late payment, contract setup, negotiation, and so on. And where we can't advise directly, then we signpost to other organisations that can. So we have routes into various organisations who are better able than us to help in particular circumstances. So we're a advice and signposting organisation, and currently one of our prime activities over the last few weeks has been talking to small businesses and helping them through the minefield of advice that's available on the government support. Sadly, some of those people didn't go to Baldwins for their advice and have been floundering a bit, and we've been able to help them and send them in the right direction to get the advice they need. The second element is around resolving, collecting and investigating. So we have the power to investigate complaints from small businesses of less than 50 employees about large businesses with more than 50 employees, where they are not paying their bills promptly or at all. And we can intervene and we can talk to both parties and we can issue reports setting out what we found and naming the businesses concerned and giving them recommendations on what they should do to improve their payment practice. We've published about 8 of those so far, 2 since I've been in post, the most recent just a few days ago. But right now, in the COVID-19 crisis, my focus is more on help than it is on retribution. And I think we're seeing a time when it's really important that businesses feel they can get help. And one of the things my team are doing regularly now, often as a result of a webinar that I do where someone gets in touch with me either through the webinar or afterwards, is have conversations with large customers, talk to them and secure payment for them. There was an example fairly recently where we were talking to, I was on a webinar and with the ICAW, and a participant emailed me afterwards with some details of a particular situation she'd got. One of my caseworkers dropped an email to the customer concerned. The customer on Tuesday had said to the supplier there was no money available for them. There was nothing on the payment run. They couldn't accept a payment anytime soon. We got involved on Thursday talking to the customer, and on Friday, £91,000 appeared in the supplier's account without any notice whatsoever. And that's not untypical of the impact we can have. Another example was a small supplier to a restaurant where we managed to secure £524 within a matter of hours of talking to them. £524 sounds quite trivial, but for a micro business, that can be the difference between putting food on the table or not. And that's where I believe we can have often the most impact. In the £91,000 example, we've been told we've been led to believe that that means 25 people will keep their jobs and the business will remain active where it was in danger of going under. But for a tiny business, then a very small amount of money can A, mean they can feed the family, but B, it means they can sleep at night. And we know that this crisis is having a huge impact on well-being and mental health, and late payment is an integral part of that. So it's really important that we get involved in that. And the third element of what we do is changing culture, and that's something that is important to us. Before I get into that, I'd like to ask Jess if she wouldn't mind just to run the poll that we prepared. So as you vote on that, let's see what the so 72% are saying that COVID-19 is being used as a reason for non-payment. Can you run the second poll, please, Jess? I find that quite an encouraging response, actually. If 67% have been talked to before delays have been imposed, that's better than we're seeing across the board. And let me explain what I mean by that. We've seen over recent days some of the best behaviour going on, and we've seen some of the worst. So Morrison's early doors said that they would pay all their smallest suppliers immediately, and they would recategorize small as a larger amount of turnover than they previously considered their smallest suppliers. We've seen Waitrose, Tesco, Sainsbury's all follow suit in paying suppliers quicker. We've seen Vodafone do the same thing. A couple of weeks ago, Taylor Wimpey announced a pay it forward scheme where they're paying their smallest contractors in advance for work that hasn't yet been done in order to make sure they have the cash in their bank to survive. And in those cases, I've been writing to the chief execs of those businesses, thanking them for what they're doing to support and make the supply chain sustainable. Conversely, we've seen examples where businesses have written out to their entire supply chain and just said, sorry, COVID-19 is a bit of a problem for us. We're not going to pay you until it's over, or we're going to take an extra 90 days on every invoice that we have outstanding. That for me is an unacceptable approach. And in those cases, I've written to the chief exec and asked to have a conversation with them about their view of what they're doing and the impact they're having. And we need to get large businesses to recognize that they need to move from the transactional nature of what they're doing to the emotional nature of the impact they're having. And I'm urging them to work in a spirit of collaboration rather than confrontation, so that they talk to businesses that they're struggling to pay. I don't think it would be naive to suggest that no business needs to make a tough decision right now around cash flow. Every business is suffering, but they can do that in a spirit of flexibility, pragmatism, and conversation. And what we're saying to the biggest business is, if you can't pay your entire supply chain, then at least pay the smallest ones who are most vulnerable and talk to them to understand the impact that you're going to have. The example I talked of earlier, where we secured £524 for a supplier, was of absolute crucial nature for her and was really important. And for the large business concerned, it was a drop in the ocean. It was no skin off their nose to pay that amount of money. So we really need to make that happen. And I've had some really good conversations in recent days with chief execs of large businesses. I was talking to the chief exec of a large fashion business in the retail sector just 10 days ago. And as a result of that conversation, the week I spoke to him, they released £500,000 out to smallest businesses and paid 170 on the day that I had the conversation with him. That made a real difference to those 170 businesses. And we need to get big businesses to understand the impact they have and the consequences of their actions. And we've seen other examples where large businesses have now given us contact details so that a small business who's suffering can talk directly to the finance director and get funds released. What's really important right now is that businesses talk to each other. Small businesses that are really suffering need to tell their big customers that that's the case, so they understand the impact and can help mitigate against it. And large businesses need to talk to small businesses before they take unilateral action that isn't helpful or thoughtful. That's it from me, Chris, so back to you.
Yes, thanks, Phil. And again, I think really quite inspiring to a certain degree of those sort of stories. And the point you make, isn't it, is that it might be 90 grand, it might be 500 quid, but that's the nature of business, isn't it? That for some even a comparatively small figure could make such a massive difference. So, Phil, thanks so much. Really interesting. There's some various questions. I would encourage anyone on the webinar to put your questions into the chat box as we go. I've got a few that I'm sort of taking notes on, and we'll also bring our other speakers in. So on to our finally, thank you for that, Phil. Fantastic, and we'll come back to you a little bit later. So moving on to now is a good friend of mine, a regular contact in his position as Tamworth Chamber president. Now more so than ever. I think it's James has been in the post into his third year now. A local Lichfield business, originally set up in Tamworth as well, so linked to both areas. Passionate about the area, passionate about small business, hence the pay in 30 days campaign. And I think useful in this context of this webinar is a small business owner, various conversations with others as well about the effect that this has and on small businesses, and hopefully James will be able to give some good ideas and good advice now. So James, over to you, and look forward to hearing from all four of the other panelists when we come back from your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, so I am a business owner myself. We employ 3 people. The reason why I chose paying 30 days as our main policy for Lichfield and Tamworth Chamber of Commerce is the impacts it's had on me physically and also mentally with late payments. It's the biggest hindrance of growth for any business. A lot of plans and ideas go by the wayside when customers don't pay. We've been in scenarios where we've had up to a quarter's worth of invoices not paid. We were having to think about how we're going to pay our VAT bill, corporation tax, employee salary, etc. As a business, I decided to take some steps, and one of those was to look at how I can get money in quicker, and also how to take out the daily rigmarole of ringing up customers and basically pleading to get paid. So one step I did was change my accountancy system from Sage 50 to 0 and save myself 4 hours a day just by automating invoices and invoice chasing. We also took a very tough line on persistent late payers. We weren't afraid of issuing solicitors' letters quite quickly soon after the invoice due date. We had all kinds of crazy excuses why invoices can't be paid, but as soon as you mention the solicitor or even the small business commissioner, things used to move on. One of the big things which still sort of affects me today is the mental health issue. Jess, would you mind just putting up my first question on the poll? So I'd be interested to see what results this has. I can pretty much say what effect this has had on me. One is obviously the white beard. The other thing is I've had stomach cramps, projectile vomit, sleepless nights, mood swings, all kinds of things which affect some uncharacteristic behaviour as well. So it really does have a big effect, particularly the sleep, where, okay, 50%, that's interesting. Particularly the sleep patterns where you're waking up at night thinking, when is that invoice going to be paid? And if it doesn't get paid, what are you going to do? Often or not, the banks will not help you at all. You've got to find out ways to minimize the damage. If you go back to the slides, please, Jess. Thank you. So, like I said earlier, when you've got late payments and bad debt because people aren't paying you, it really does affect how the company grows. When we introduce 0 and the hard, tough measures we put in place, our average was 55 days, and the average value of an invoice was around £450 to £500. We got that down to 32 days, which meant that we could employ 2 people at 20 grand plus salaries full time, and also increase both myself and my business partner's wages. We've consistently kept it to around 32 to 33 days. With Brexit towards the end of last year, that actually creeped back up to 50. People were stopping payments on that. COVID-19, we've had an impact on that. Obviously, we've had a massive tail off of businesses, but customers actually started communicating to us saying that they were going to have problems. But we had some of them, we got them to reduce their invoices, regular invoices, by 80%, so that they can at least have some sort of continuity with their services. But we were very, very open with our suppliers and asked if we got into troubles, would they be willing to defer payments up to 3 months? And 99% of them have said yes. But what we're going to do as a business is continue as business as normal, still pay our invoices, still look to get new business on and move forward. The other things that the Chamber are doing around paying 30 days is to actively get businesses to sign up to the pledge. And the more voices we have, the more we can possibly help Phil get more powers to make possibly paying invoices within 30 days. Phil could probably correct me on the figures, but last time I checked, I think it was about 11 billion was owed to small businesses. And that's a hell of a lot of money. That's over 30 days. But if you've got large organizations pushing end of month 90 days, that's 120 days before you get paid. And the question ethically is, if you're a CEO of that company, would you want to be paid in 120 days in the arrears every single month? You wouldn't. You wouldn't have a business if you did that to your staff or your staff will leave. So the key thing is to be ethical. And particularly around now, you've got to have some leeway, particularly with your clients and suppliers. And if you have the money, if it's not enough, just maybe pay a part payment and agree a payment term so that both parties are suitably compensated. Because at the end of the day, we need to keep the cash flowing, because this will stop. And basically, you don't want to disrupt your supply chain. And if you don't pay, then we will have issues going forward. Jess, can you put up my other question, Paul? So I just asked this question because in some European countries like Germany, you have to pay on the invoice due date. It's legislation, and in the UK we don't have that yet. And one of the things I'm trying to push with some others on social media and other business groups is to get some sort of legislation in place to make it a better and more even playing field. The fact that 76% of us want or could support this is great. At the moment, the campaign only has 91 companies signed up in the West Midlands. The membership of our Chamber of Commerce is 160. There's over 3,000 members in the West Midlands. If only 91 are supporting it, that's not great. So what I've done is I've posted a link in the comments and in the chat. So if you all can sign up to pay in 30 days as well, we could perhaps give a bigger voice for business to get some sort of level playing field in place. So if anyone's got any questions, please do ask. And that's it, Chris, for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, James. And again, much like Phil's examples, I think those, that you touched upon mental health and sleep. I think much like I said, Phil's examples around, those small payments coming through, I think it really does show quite how important that is. So, firstly, a huge thank you to all three speakers. It's really, I find this, this sort of subject really quite interesting and quite inspiring, and also it shows how important this is. So we'll go on to the questions now. As I said, we've got about 10-15 minutes for questions. I can see a few people have typed a few and they're coming on board. If you are going to ask a question, just press on the question logo, and that will sort of highlight it more, and it means Jess can share it. We've had our first one from Tom Dunkley. So a question for Philip first. We were forced into signing a supplier contract for a customer. We had 30-day invoices from them. A few days later, it was chased and asked for an additional 30 days, of which we agreed. The 30 days went by and no response. And then I suppose, moving on is the fact that they've been furloughed. How lenient should they be? And should we issue an interest invoice, or is it something that should be avoided at the moment? So, quite a common question probably for businesses who've come into contact with Phil. What do you think?
Well, it is a common question. You're right, Chris, and we see it regularly. My view is that there are two things you should do. One is follow James's advice and not be too flexible. So take a tough line with large customers. But what I would say specifically on this case is, Tom, get in touch with me after this conference. Get the Chamber to give you my email address. Talk to me. I'll get the team to look at this for you, and let's get involved for you and try and talk to the customer and see what we can do to help you. That's what the Small Business Commissioner is there for. You've had our contact details, so get in touch.
Brilliant. No, that's great, Phil. That's great. So I suppose, yeah, just picking up on some further questions that I've sort of noted down from the discussion. I think the area you mentioned about, Phil, with the best and worst behaviour and some of the key larger businesses such as Morrison's, Waitrose, Tesco, Vodafone, Taylor Wimpey, etc., paying forward. How important is that? And how important is that is publicised where possible to sort of instigate that culture change? And you mentioned the culture change, and so did James, to be fair, that's so important in that. How important is some of those businesses getting on board doing that?
It's really important, Chris, because we need to see leaders standing up, and we need businesses to follow the example that they set. So there was a piece in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago about Taylor Wimpey, which I commented on, and some other examples. I think the headline was, "We need the big boys to do the right thing." And I think it's vital that we get that lead. At the end of this crisis, people are going to remember some of the behaviour they've seen, and it's really important that we have businesses who lead by example and do what they can. We're seeing a real sort of wartime spirit at the moment with, kids delivering prescriptions and people doing shopping for people and so on. And we need exactly the same climate in business, between businesses. And so the more we can encourage businesses to do the right thing by each other, have conversations. And I really like James' example of talking to suppliers early on and saying, if we have a problem, can you be flexible? Because we need people to do that. So we need to push this out there and publicise it as much as we possibly can.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Phil. Thank you. Just seeing another question come through as well from small cake and party shop from Lisa in Tamworth. Good to see we're reaching businesses large and small. That's fantastic. I suppose that's probably one over to Baldwins and the two guys at Baldwins. Could you either one or the other? I know Mark's on the call now as well, but what's your view on that in terms of templates and rolling cash flow?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the first part, certainly. Certainly, Lisa, if you want to get in touch with myself after this seminar, I've got a little template that's pretty easy to use that we share with clients, just an Excel spreadsheet where you can just drop some numbers in and it starts to populate for you, and we can certainly help you with that. As I said in the presentation, I think it's a really important thing at the moment to understand where we're going to be over the next 3 months, so certainly help. I'll chuck out to everybody else in terms of generating income at the time while social distancing, because I think that's a great question. And certainly, personally, we have seen some businesses change very much in how they're doing things and adapting to the new rules that we're all living under. But I'll throw that out to the.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I think, Lacey, probably from various members of our chamber exec board that we had our executive meeting for Lichfield and Tamworth yesterday. It was a lot about the confidence and go. If you've got an idea, go for it, and of course adhere to social distancing. But if you've got ideas and a way you feel your business could change or diversify, I think is give it a go and be confident and lean on some of your peers, some of your contacts to support you in that process. And of course, when you do the work and they don't pay, get in touch with Phil and he'll chase you on that alongside Paul's cash flow guide. So working through, I'd say there's a few more questions coming through as well. I'll bring in Mark if I can. Mark Huddleston at Baldwins has worked in the bank and finance sector for many years. I'll jump off the camera now and let Mark in. Jess, if you could add Mark. Mark, just if you could give us some of your thoughts on what you've heard, some of the questions perhaps, and some of the themes raised by Paul, Phil, and James. Pressure now. Is Mark listening? Yes, there we go. He's on board, right? There you are. I can stay on the screen by the looks of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I was really interested listening to to James's comments in particular, just talking around the impact that slow payment, late payment has on businesses. I mean, I come from a banking and a finance background where over the years there's been all sorts of different products put into the marketplace, to help businesses to fund that working capital gap. Well, that in itself isn't quite the same way as dealing with the root cause of actually getting people to pay to terms, as they should. I remember back in my banking days. I mean, the average day, times to pay an invoice. I think most clients would probably invoice on 30 days end of month or 30 days, from date of invoice. And I think, in reality, isn't the average these days about 75 days from date of invoice? And that's just the average, let alone allowing for, things like, COVID to slow down payment even more. And it does have that, that insidious effect on a business and the people, the people within it.
Yeah, moving on that theme, probably one for Phil. What do you find is the average, or you mentioned about a culture change and that change? What is average, and has that changed over the last few years? And do you see the work that you're doing is having an effect?
Yeah, Chris. I mean, I've not seen the average 75 days figure quoted, but certainly the average is edging towards and over 60. And I think that's indicative, as James says, of a sort of insidious nature of this. And James's point earlier around the £11 billion being outstanding, it's now 23.4 billion, as reported at the end of 2019 by Pay UK. So it's a big number, and it's a big amount of money. But I think we need to get this down to the beyond the transactional, down to the individual. And I thought James's articulation of the specific impact on his physical and mental health was really insightful. And I think that's the sort of message we need big businesses to understand, because this isn't about numbers and rows on spreadsheets. This is around individuals. I mean, we buy from people, we sell to people, we pay people, and we need to recognise it in that climate.
Yeah, I think, and that's an ongoing view in terms of numbers of deaths and infections and all the horrible sort of stats you can pull out around COVID-19. Yeah, the fact is that behind those numbers, there's some real strife and personal stories, and and I think some of the work I'm sure that you're doing, and I think, I suppose, having the confidence, isn't it, I suppose, to a certain degree, to be honest and upfront with some of your suppliers and not feel that that's almost a weakness that you're showing. It's a fact, it's a story, it's an honesty, and I think that's probably a key thing. Paul, I suppose your views on that from an accountant and working with clients. How do you find your clients have reacted to that side in terms of telling their personal story to some of their suppliers? Is that something you see? Is that I suppose that's a difficult one to change, I suppose, isn't it? Which is important.
Yeah, it depends very much on the individuals. I think, as Philip was saying, it's some individuals are quite confident in that. I've got a particular client actually based in Tamworth, and he's very good at that. He speaks very well with his suppliers, did before and does after, and he speaks well with his customers and tells them that he's under pressure, as Philip's encouraged people to do, and he actually manages his cash flow. One of the best people I know. So it's certainly, I can totally agree with what Philip's been saying. It certainly works. The communication piece is really important. I think the British stiff upper lip and not admitting anything's wrong stopped a lot of people doing that, unfortunately. And I think things like Philip's been talking about certainly be a good education piece. And there is change that needs to happen. There is change in the way we all communicate in terms of business in that way, personally. And I think we have got to change. And I think Chris was saying earlier about how in Germany things are done very differently and how that helps cash flow. So I think there's certainly lessons to be learned.
Yeah, and I suppose, James, as you just jump in on that, if we have a final comment from you, and then we'll do a wrap up with Phil and with Paul. Yeah, your view on that side.
Oh,
unmute. Is James's microphone working? We'll just come back to James.
Got it. Right. It's a bit slow. So taking the fact that from being tough on suppliers and also getting paid and stuff like that. I mean, it is a big challenge, and particularly around what's going around with COVID-19. I know a retailer, I won't say who it is, but they actively pushed stock back to suppliers and also pushed payment terms to over 90 days just for them to survive. But each business is slightly different. But from my side, I think if businesses did pay what they could when they can, then this late payment issue should go away. One of the things, it's just slipped my mind what I was going to say, but it's yeah. So I mean, one instance I had where you make it sort of personal is when I used to run the marketing department for a very large organisation. We owed this guy £250,000. He had the bailiffs in. Chris, you probably heard this story many a time. I literally went to the finance director of the business saying this guy's downstairs in tears, about to have his house repossessed. Why hasn't his invoice been paid? And he's like, I would do it next month. And I said, it's already at 90 days. He said, nah, do it next month. And I said, well, how would you like to be paid in 90 days?
Yeah, I think that's the thing.
Yeah, afford your mortgage.
Yeah, that clear example, and as Phil said, that mental health side, and hopefully that doesn't happen. But I'm sure there's going to be time for that.
I think the key thing is if 23 billion or around 20 billion is still owed. I mean, that is a lot. That's almost the aid package which the government has shelled out for. So the larger businesses need to start changing their mindset and putting in processes, because at the end of the day, if they're delaying payment for cash flow for them, for their shareholders, it's a false economy. If you owe £1 million and you've got £1 million showing in as profit, that's bad business. So in my view, everyone needs to be slightly more ethical. And what Philip said is how people will be remembered, how they act in this period is how they will be remembered afterwards. So we just need to be all very ethical and just think what the bigger impacts are of late payments. And that's me done.
Great, James. No, thank you. And we'll just do the final things where we've got a few minutes left. But again, it's been a really engaging conversation and really interesting discussions. And again, if there is any further questions, please put them in the chat and we can pick them up offline. But I suppose finally, if we pass to Paul for a final sort of takeaway advice, I suppose James's was be ethical. Think of your, think of the small business. Paul, what's your one piece of advice that our delegates today should take away from some of the things we've discussed?
13-week cash flow. For me, you've got to start looking to the future now. We've gone through the mothball, we've survived. Now you've got to start looking at what the next 3 months is going to be and how we're going to manage that cash. I think that's key.
And I think the cake shop, Lisa in Tamworth, I think shows that there is work to be done on that, and hopefully you can assist. And I appreciate it, Paul. Fantastic. And finally, Phil. Firstly, it's been a pleasure. And if you could give your final thoughts on it. I know we could spend 2 hours talking about some of the areas you've covered, but your final thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. So my final thought is have conversations. Communicate. Talk to your suppliers, talk to your customers, and make sure you're having serious conversations, honest conversations, and open conversations. And don't be afraid to ask for help. That's what my office is there for, and we really want to hear from you if you need help.
Fantastic. Phil, thanks so much. A huge thanks to all on board. Thank you for all of our delegates. We will do a follow-up story around this and some of the themes sort of brought up by those final 3 comments, and I think are really good content for the Chamber to push out and advise our members in this very different and tough times for everyone. So fantastic. Thank you, everybody. We'll sign off there. And we'll look forward to hearing from you all again soon. I would suggest anyone who has got any interest in further Chamber webinars to visit our events. Speak to James, speak to Baldwins and Paul, speak to Phil, and as has he finished with his communicate. And I think at this time it's very important, especially on issues like this. So thank you all, and speak soon.
Thank you.